Hello, my name is Barend Verheijen. I'm from Studio Louter. I'm very honored to be here. Today I'm going to talk to you about emotion design, which is a method that we developed at the studio and that I think could be very useful when you have to develop an exhibition or when you start thinking about using digital media in your presentation. I'll use two examples. One is the Hari exhibition, and one is about the Boerhaave Museum, the Rijksmuseum of Science in the Netherlands. Let's see. So, what do we do at Studio Louter? Well, we really like to scare visitors, and we like to intrigue them. We even like to arouse them, because what we really want to do is to evoke emotions with the visitor. We think that every museum has in its heart a very meaningful story to tell. And if you want to tell this to the visitors, then you have to evoke emotions. And when you do that, it will be an unforgettable experience. Something about our studio: we work worldwide, predominantly for museums, sometimes also for companies, visitor centers. And we provide 4 services. So there's creative consultancy, interpretive design, but we also have in-house AV and software production, and we do a lot of academic research together with universities and museums. And we've developed emotion design. Well, this is a quote of Maya Angelou that we really liked. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that's really essential. We think that you could use emotions to transform stories into an unforgettable experience, and that's what you really like in a museum. So we try to study how can you tell a story that becomes unforgettable. And this is Robert McKee is a famous scriptwriter in Hollywood, and he wrote this book, Story, that's really a source of inspiration for us. And it's very methodological, so there's no magic in it. It just tells you what you should do. Now, before we go deeper into his theories, I'd first like to stress that, of course, movies are not similar to the museum experience. A movie is a 2-dimensional experience and not as spatial as a museum experience is. Also, they're completely different genres, because movies often are about fiction and museums are more like the genre of documentary. But maybe the most important difference is the behavior of the visitors. When you go to a cinema, you agree and you'll be obedient to the pace of the story, because the lights go out, it's dark, and then you sit until the movie is ended. And the visitors are, well, we call them anarchistic. They do whatever they like and not what we like them to do. They don't listen, they just walk through your museum and decide on their own pace. Still, there's something that's very, very similar about movies and the museum experience. And this is where McKee comes in. He says, what we do as films is we provide entertainment. And entertainment is, in its heart, a satisfying, meaningful, and emotional experience. Satisfying, meaningful, and emotional. Well, this is very key to a great museum. And for example, the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, which is our main museum, have 3 pillars for the visitor experience, and they say, we want to provide comfort, meaning, and delight. So this is very similar to the definition of McKee. And of course, the storyline or the tale is is at the base of providing this emotional experience. He says, a coherent tale should express an idea veiled inside an emotional spell. So the meaningful idea should be veiled inside an emotional spell. Now let's see if you transpond this to the museum, then you could say, how can we provide a satisfying museum experience? Well, of course, there are the objects and the facts, but then it should also be meaningful, and we should evoke emotions. And the story could bring those together. So a coherent exhibition tale expresses a meaningful idea veiled inside an emotional spell. And that's what we call at the studio emotion design. In order to come to this experience, you should answer 4 questions. And the first is about the facts. What do we want the visitor to learn? So this is the facts and the objects. But there's also the story behind the story, the meaning of the story. Why does this matter? And then, how can I experience this? How can emotions help to bridge the gap between the factual story and the story behind the story? And only when you've answered these questions, you should be answering the last one, and that's how can we help to convey this? And that's, of course, the design question. But it should really be at the end of these questions. McKee also introduced the controlling idea, and the controlling idea is that he says every great Hollywood movie can be reduced to one sentence, and this is the controlling idea, a coherent sentence that expresses a story's irreducible meaning. So here, for example, from the movie Platoon, he said the first casualty of war is innocence. That's the only a sentence that matters if you want to understand what's the movie about. It's about war, it's about the casualty, and it's about the loss of innocence. So this controlling idea could also be applied to a museum and an exhibition design. A controlling idea could be one clear, coherent, irreducible sentence that answers the 4 questions of emotion design. Now this is all very theoretical. So just 2 examples to show you that this is something that most museums already do, just not, they don't realize it, we think. So this is the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, and this is the most famous space there, the most famous gallery, and it's about Dutch painting in the 17th century. But of course there was a meaning behind it. What the builders of this museum wanted to tell in the 19th century was that art is divine, and the Dutch painters provide this divinity. So they wanted to evoke awe in the visitors. And how did they do this? Well, they built a cathedral for the arts. Just look at this picture. There are chapels, there are columns, and then there's the night watch of Rembrandt at the end of the corridor as a kind of altar. So you really are in a cathedral. And the controlling idea here could be worship the Dutch art from the Golden Age in a national temple for culture. The Louvre, it's very similar to the Rijksmuseum, but it's even more eclectical. It tries to show you all art from all ages, from everywhere. But of course, there's also meaning behind it, and that's that art is everlasting. And what they do, it's almost irony, the emotion that they want to evoke, because where did they do this? They showed all these objects in the Louvre, which was the palace, the symbol for the fallen monarchy. So you're kind of in a cynical way reminded of how everlasting art is and how everlasting we are not. Celebrate how art overcomes everything in the palace of art. So what could you do with it? Well, I have two examples. One is about the Mata Hari exhibition in the Fries Museum. Mata Hari was, I don't know if you know her, but she was a famous exotic dancer in the start of the 20th century, and she was executed during World War I for espionage. She was really world famous then. She was also from Dutch origins, and nobody knows that. So the life before her career is really unknown. When we were asked to do this exhibition, it turned out that there were very few objects. So that was really difficult for an exhibition. The only thing they had were documents, but then a great many documents from the archives. And we did this together with Opera Amsterdam. And we started with the emotion design. So we said, okay, this is a movie, this is an exhibition about the life and death of Margaretha Celle, that was her birth name. What the museum really wanted to tell is the harsh fate of an independent woman in a world dominated by men. Because all the all the choices that she had to make during her life were influenced by the fact that she tried to be an independent woman, and men didn't like that. So we said, let's try and evoke drama where you can and arouse sympathy and understanding for her. And we did this by creating symbolic dreamscapes of the key moments where these decisions were made. And so the controlling idea could be relive the key moments of a doomed independent woman who triumphed over fate by becoming a myth. Now, what can you do with these kinds of definitions? Well, for example, you could look at your storied structure. Usually, at biographical exhibitions, you'd start with the birth and then end with the death. And we thought, let's start with the part that we all know, and that's also evokes the most questions. Let's start with the trial and the execution, and then go back to her youth. So that was a very cinematographic approach. We also said, let's make real scenes. Let's focus on the real moments in our life that were most important, and then transform them into kind of symbolic dreamscapes where digital media can help to stress the emotional message of each scene. Some examples, when you started, these are 2 business cards, and they're practically from the same period. And the left one is from Margaretha Sella, and the right one is from Mata Hari. So this really symbolizes her transition from the woman Margaretha Sella into her alter ego Mata Hari. And then when you enter, there's a projection on a veil, and this veil is transparent. She always danced with veils and stripped. And we projected the highlights of her career, pictures of the highlights of her career on this veil. But because it's transparent, you can also see the next space. And here you can see her prosecutor already looking literally through her eyes to us and showing her terrible fate. We've used many small multimedia installations. For example, this is the word from her death proclamation. And we introduced this small window here. There's the prayer book that she used during the last day of her execution. And we thought, what was she thinking about when she was there at her last day? So there's this small window, and when you look through the window, you can see her dancing in the space that you enter at the end of your visit. This is also an example of the symbolic approach that we used. This is her youth. She started very happy, but then her father got bankrupt, her parents divorced, and in the end her mother died, and she fled into a terrible marriage. So we have this big contrast with all kinds of documents and small quotes from the letters that her mother sent her. And then through the window you can see the next phase of her life. She fled to the Dutch colonies in Indonesia together with her new husband, and they got 2 children, and one of them died. And there's no object of the children, so that was really difficult to tell to the audience. How can we show something of the children? So we took a bed, and then we embroidered the scenes from her, the letters about the death of her son, into the sheets of the bed. And these were the top objects of the museum, and again, these were letters. But they were very interesting. It's about her divorce, and this is where she tells, I can do only 2 things. I could end my life, or I could do something very drastic, and that is going to Paris and start a new career. And you can follow these letters, and then once you enter the big final gallery, there's the dance of Mata Hari, and it's all projected on transparent veils, and you're literally in between this dance. I'll show you a movie just the last gallery, so right after their death, the World War broke out, and then she was slowly becoming a spy without really wanting it, and that was the final bit that led to her death. A small movie just to give you an impression. I hope it works. How does it work? Well, there were some negatives in the results. So some of the visitors really thought there were not enough objects and there was too much to read. And also some thought that the story title, the exhibition title, was not appropriate because it was called Mata Hari, the Myth and the Maiden, or the Myth and the Girl. And the whole thing that we wanted to tell is that she wasn't a girl, but was a very strong woman. But there were also a lot of positives. Many visitors came. It was highly rated, and more interesting, visitors stayed longer than usual. It won a lot of awards that we're of course very proud of, but maybe the thing that we were most proud of was that some of the visitors came out crying. So a bit more about emotion design and digital and AV media, because that's why you're all here. Media can also help to evoke emotions and show you the meaning of the story. And how? Well, media can, of course, provide extra information and facts about, that support the objects. They can help to evoke emotions, for example, by using sound or projections, as you just saw. And media can stimulate the visitor to think about the meaning of the story, for example, by using metaphors that reveal the story behind the story. This is an example of the Rijksmuseum Boerhaave. It's all about science, and it wanted to attract more families without losing the traditional, older academic visitors. And they have a great object. It's really fantastic objects if you know the story. But if you don't, then you just see an old object and really don't understand what it was used for. So together with them we came to the emotion design, and that was, of course, it's about facts of the history of the science in the Netherlands. But then the meaning was that could scientists see things differently? And seeing differently is something very important for us all. And we wanted to evoke inspiration with the visitors. How did we do this? Well, we said, let's show there's always a triangle between the objects, between a person and the views, the new revolutionary new views that he came to. So in this museum you see things differently by understanding how science is about seeing differently. How did we use the media instruments? We came with in-depth information, of course, magazines, providing facts. We used a lot of projections. This is, for example, about bacterial diseases, and we showed the victims of these diseases while you look into a microscope to discover the bacteria. And we also used a lot of games, because of course when you start to mix the different parts, it's more interesting. So for example here, this is about, we wanted to tell something about the medical revolutions, and we used a Kinect, a projection where your own mirror image is confronted with terrible diseases and you can cure yourself, for example, using Röntgen beams. A movie where that is on the rate of on the tempo of your heartbeat, and it's about a cardiogram. But the most successful one was this one, and that's where I want to end with you. This is about Verheijen, who came with really precise drawings of the human body, and we projected this on the visitor, so you can see how incredibly accurate these drawings were. But you can also understand how important it was, that what he came to realize, so his new vision, and you could hear his story while you did this. I'll end. Oh. Thank you.